Let's get started. Story number 1.
It started like any other weekend. My wife, Clara, and I had just settled into our new home about 3 months earlier. It was an older house in a quiet, semi-rural neighborhood about 30 minutes from the city. The area was peaceful, surrounded by tall oaks and pines, and there was a sense of seclusion we found comforting. We wanted the space, the air, and the break from the chaotic rhythm of urban life. That Friday night, Clara had gone to bed early. I stayed up, flipping between a basketball game and mindless YouTube clips while sipping on a glass of bourbon. The house was quiet except for the occasional creak from the old hardwood floors, something we'd grown used to. I turned off the TV around midnight and did my routine, checked the locks, turned off the porch light, and peeked out into the backyard just out of habit. The moonlight made everything hazy and silvery. Our backyard was large, unfenced, and backed up to a stretch of woods. It looked peaceful, but I had a chill crawling up the back of my neck, the kind that didn't come from the cold. I couldn't pinpoint why. I brushed it off, chalking it up to too much late-night bourbon, and went to bed. It was around 3:15 a.m. when I woke up. At first, I thought it was the wind, the way it howled through the trees sometimes, but then I heard it again, a soft, deliberate creak, not the usual house-settling kind. This one was slow, purposeful, like someone was easing their weight onto a step to avoid making noise. I sat up in bed and listened. Clara stirred slightly beside me but didn't wake. I didn't move right away. I just listened. Then came another sound, faint but unmistakable. A door hinge, slowly moving. Not opening all the way, just enough to make that squeaking noise like it had been nudged open. I slid out of bed slowly and grabbed the baseball bat I kept tucked under the frame. I moved toward the door, ears straining. The hallway was pitch black, but I didn't turn on the light. I didn't want to alert anyone if someone was really in the house. As I stepped into the hallway, I could hear it more clearly. Footsteps, soft and barely audible, but there, and breathing. Not mine. I held my breath. From the shadows near the living room came the subtle clink of something metallic. It wasn't loud, just a slight tap. Then nothing. Dead silence. I turned my head toward the master bedroom to check on Clara. She was still asleep, lying on her side, unaware of any of it. I moved slowly down the hallway, staying close to the wall. My heart was thudding so loudly I was sure they could hear it. I had no plan. Just a bat. No gun, no phone in my pocket. My cell was on the nightstand. I felt exposed and stupid. I turned the corner into the living room and froze. A figure stood near the sliding glass door that led to the backyard. They weren't moving, just standing. I couldn't see their face, but they were tall, wearing something dark, maybe a hoodie. They blended into the shadows, but the faint light coming through the glass revealed just enough of their silhouette. They hadn't seen me. I backed away slowly, foot by foot, until I was out of the room. I didn't even make a sound, which surprised me. When I got back to the bedroom, I shut the door quietly and locked it. Then I shook Clara awake. She startled, groggy, and confused. "What's wrong?" "There's someone in the house," I whispered. "Stay quiet." Her eyes widened. She sat up and reached for her phone. I motioned to her not to call yet, not with her voice assistant set to full volume. I grabbed my phone and called 911. The dispatcher answered immediately. I whispered into the phone, explaining everything as clearly as I could. She told us to stay where we were and stay quiet. Officers were already en route. Then we heard it again. Another creak. This time right outside the bedroom door. Clara covered her mouth with both hands to stifle a gasp. There was a shadow under the door. Movement. They were there. Listening. I held the bat tight, trying to keep my hands from shaking. The shadow stood there for what felt like an hour, but it was probably only a minute. Then, suddenly, the door handle moved. Not jostled or banged, just slowly turned, as though the intruder was testing it, trying to open it quietly. It stopped. Another pause. Then the sound of retreating footsteps, soft, deliberate. I exhaled. Sirens began to wail in the distance. Thank God. We heard a loud bang from the front of the house, probably the person trying to escape. I jumped up, cracked the door open slightly, and peeked down the hallway. The front door was wide open. Whoever it was had bolted. When the cops arrived minutes later, they swept the house and the surrounding area. No one. The guy was gone. They found boot prints near the backyard sliding door, and one of the windows had been pried open. That's how he got in. What chilled us most wasn't that someone had broken in, it was how long they might have been inside before I noticed. The police found smudges on the glass of our cabinet doors in the kitchen. One of the chairs had been slightly moved. That metallic clink I'd heard, the intruder had taken a knife from our kitchen block and dropped it, possibly after noticing I was awake. But it didn't end there. The next night, we didn't sleep. Not really. Every noise made us jump. I kept the lights on in the hallway and put heavy furniture in front of the back door. We debated staying in a hotel, but the thought of leaving the house unsecured again was worse. Around 2 a.m., there was a knock on the door. Not loud, just a soft, steady knock. We froze. I crept to the peephole, praying it was the police doing a follow-up or a neighbor, but there was no one, just the dark porch. Another knock, this time from the back door. I turned and whispered, "Get the phone, call the cops." Clara was already dialing. The knocks grew louder, more aggressive, moving from one side of the house to the other, like someone was circling it. It stopped, then started again, this time from the laundry room window. I grabbed the bat and turned off the lights in the living room. I peeked out through the blinds, but saw nothing. We stayed huddled in the hallway, Clara on the phone with 911 again. They dispatched another unit. Minutes passed. Then we heard a sound that didn't come from the outside. It came from inside. A floorboard creaked in the guest bedroom. My skin went cold. I didn't wait this time. I flung the door open and shouted, "I have a weapon! Cops are coming!" There was a noise. Fast footsteps, a crash, then silence. I ran down the hall, heart racing. The window in the guest room was open. Whoever it was had been inside again the entire time. The police showed up and swept the house. Nothing. But they believed us. They could see the window latch had been broken. There were footprints outside in the wet grass leading away into the woods. The scariest part came later when they reviewed our security cam footage. We'd installed a camera near the garage and another above the back door, but the one facing the backyard had glitched and turned off sometime before the incident. The garage camera, though, caught something horrifying. At around 1:45 a.m., a tall figure walked into the frame, hood pulled low, face obscured. They moved with complete calm and confidence, stepping right up to the garage door and kneeling down, probably trying to tamper with the lock. But they didn't come alone. 2 more figures entered the frame, both similarly dressed. All of them stood silently outside for a full minute before splitting up and vanishing off camera. There had been 3 of them. The cops speculated it might have been part of some organized burglary group, but that didn't explain the return the second night. Nothing was stolen. Our valuables were untouched. It felt personal, deliberate. We moved out 3 days later, didn't wait to sell the house, just packed up and left. Clara developed insomnia. I installed 5 security cameras in our new place and keep a crowbar by the bed. We never figured out who they were. The police never made any arrests. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear that slow creak in my head. And I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't woken up that first night. Or if the door hadn't been locked. Story the end.
Story number 2.
It started like any other Saturday evening. I was home alone in my small townhouse on the edge of a quiet suburb. My husband Jake was out of town visiting family, and I had the house to myself for the weekend. I didn't mind. I liked the peace and quiet. The weather was gloomy, a low rain tapping against the windows, and I spent most of the day binge-watching old movies and cleaning the house. Around 9 p.m., I decided to make myself some dinner. I was chopping vegetables in the kitchen when I heard a faint noise outside. Maybe a car door shutting, or someone walking on the wet pavement. I paused and looked out the window, but couldn't see much. The streetlights flickered in the rain, casting long shadows between the trees. No one was around. I shrugged and went back to cooking. About 15 minutes later, I heard the noise again, this time closer. It was a soft thud, almost like someone dropping something on the porch. Milo, my dog, perked up and growled low in his throat, his ears standing straight. I told Milo to calm down, but I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling creeping over me. The rain outside was getting heavier, and the house suddenly felt colder than before. I locked the back door out of habit, even though I was sure it was already locked. Then I heard a knock. Not a normal knock. It was slow and deliberate, 3 deep raps on the front door. My heart jumped. I wasn't expecting anyone. Who would be out in this weather, knocking at almost 10 p.m.? I peeked through the peephole. No one. Just the dark, wet porch, empty and silent except for the rain dripping from the awning. I opened the door a crack and called out, "Hello?" No answer. Only the rain. I stepped back inside and locked the door quickly. Milo was still growling, more agitated now. I turned on the porch light, hoping to scare away any prankster or animal, but nothing moved. I sat down on the couch and tried to calm myself. Maybe it was just the wind or a branch hitting the door. But then I heard it again, a scraping sound coming from the side of the house near the garage. I grabbed my phone and flashlight and crept quietly toward the hallway that led to the garage door. Milo followed, his tail stiff but not wagging. The scraping noise stopped. I paused and listened. The rain was louder now, pounding on the roof, making it hard to hear anything else. Suddenly, the garage door rattled. My breath caught. Someone was trying to get in. I ran back into the living room and locked the door between the house and the garage. I could hear faint thuds from the garage side, probably someone trying to force it open. I pulled out the cordless phone and tried calling Jake. No answer. I tried 911, but the line was busy. I called again. Busy. I tried my cell phone, but no signal. The power flickered and went out. Darkness engulfed the house. Milo barked furiously, darting between my legs. I grabbed the baseball bat from under the couch and moved toward the kitchen, where I kept a small emergency kit with a flashlight and pepper spray. Then I heard a voice, low and calm, coming from the garage door. "Hey, I don't want to hurt you. Just open the door." I froze. The voice was male, familiar somehow, but I couldn't place it. "Who is it?" I called out, voice trembling. No answer. The door handle jiggled violently, then the door shook as someone tried to kick it open. I backed away toward the stairs, clutching the bat. Milo growled louder, hairs standing on end. The front door slammed shut from the outside. I gasped. I ran to check the peephole. 2 men stood outside on the porch, dripping wet from the rain, staring up at the window. One held something long and dark in his hand. I slammed the door and locked it. I was trapped. They started banging on the door, shouting obscenities. I ran upstairs to the master bedroom, locked the door, and pulled the dresser in front of it. I called the police again. This time, the line connected. I whispered my address and told the dispatcher what was happening. She told me to stay quiet and wait for officers. Minutes stretched like hours. The banging on the front door stopped suddenly. Then I heard footsteps on the porch. Heavy boots. They moved toward the side door. I held my breath. A moment later, I heard a crash from the garage. The side door to the house was forced open. Milo barked fiercely and ran down the stairs. I could hear a struggle, a grunt, then a thud. My heart raced. I grabbed the bedside phone to call the police again, but it went dead. I was alone. I heard footsteps coming up the stairs. Slow, deliberate. Closer. I retreated into the closet, shutting the door as quietly as possible. Milo's barking turned into a whimper. The bedroom door creaked open. A dark silhouette appeared in the doorway. I held my breath, clutching the bat so tight my knuckles went white. The man stepped in, flashlight sweeping across the room. He looked around, then spoke softly. "Where is she?" Milo growled low. I prayed he wouldn't find me. The man turned toward the closet door. My hands shook. Then the door handle started to turn. I gripped the bat and prepared to fight for my life. Suddenly, a loud siren wailed outside. The man cursed and bolted out of the room. I rushed out and locked the bedroom door again. The police burst into the house moments later, guns drawn. They swept through every room. Outside, they caught 2 men running down the street. They were the ones who had tried to break in. Later, I learned they were part of a gang targeting homes in the area. They had been watching the house for days. They knew when Jake was out of town. They knew I was alone. They told me they wanted money, valuables, but I had none. The whole night replayed in my mind over and over. The fear, the helplessness, the cold silence when everything stopped. I still hear the knock sometimes, and every time the power flickers, I feel that same chill creeping down my spine. I never thought something like this would happen to me, but it did, and I'll never forget it. Story the end.
Story number 3.
The sun had just dipped below the horizon when I pulled into my driveway, the weight of the day pressing heavily on my shoulders. I had moved into this small townhouse about 3 months ago, in a quiet neighborhood that felt safe and familiar. The kind of place where neighbors nodded as they watered their lawns and kids played basketball until the streetlights flickered on. I liked it because it was peaceful, and after years of bouncing from apartment to apartment, it felt like home. That evening, I was exhausted but content. My job was demanding, and lately I'd been working overtime, so the idea of a quiet night with some takeout and a movie was exactly what I needed. I unlocked the door, slipped inside, and flipped on the lights. Everything was as I had left it that morning. I tossed my keys on the counter and went to the kitchen to make some tea. The house was quiet, too quiet. Normally, I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator or the soft ticking of the clock in the living room, but tonight, the silence felt different, heavier. As I poured hot water into my cup, I thought I heard a faint creak upstairs, like a floorboard settling. I froze for a moment, listening intently, but the house remained still. Probably just my imagination. I went to the living room, curled up on the couch, and started a movie. Halfway through, I realized I hadn't checked the locks. I got up, went to the front door, and double locked it. Then I went around the house, checking windows, the back door, and the sliding glass door leading to the small backyard. Everything was secure. Feeling safer, I went back to the couch and settled in, the tea warming my hands. Outside, the wind rustled the leaves, and somewhere a dog barked in the distance. I was just starting to relax when my phone buzzed. A text from a number I didn't recognize. "You're alone." My heart skipped. I stared at the message, unsure if it was a prank or something worse. I didn't reply. I deleted the message and locked the phone, telling myself it was probably some teenager messing around. Minutes later, the power flickered. The lights dimmed, then came back on. I checked the breaker, but everything seemed fine. Still, the momentary darkness sent a chill down my spine. I decided to call my friend Jenna, just to hear a familiar voice. She picked up on the second ring, cheerful and unaware of my creeping anxiety. We chatted for a few minutes, then I hung up, telling myself I was overreacting. I turned off the TV and headed upstairs to get ready for bed. As I walked down the hallway, I noticed the bathroom door was slightly ajar. Strange. I was sure I had closed it this morning. I pushed it open and flicked on the light. Nothing out of place. I shut the door firmly and moved on. Lying in bed, I tried to fall asleep, but the uneasy feeling didn't fade. Then I heard it. A soft tapping at the window. I froze, heart pounding. Slowly, I reached for my phone to check the time. It was nearly 2 a.m. The tapping came again, slow and deliberate. I pulled back the curtain slightly. Outside, the yard was bathed in moonlight, empty and still. No sign of anyone. Relieved, I closed the curtain, but the tapping started again, this time at the front door. I barely breathed, my eyes fixed on the door's peephole. Another tap. I grabbed the baseball bat I kept by the bed, a habit formed after a minor break-in at a friend's house, and crept toward the bedroom door. Slowly, I opened it and peeked into the hallway. The hallway light was off. I flicked the switch, and the dim bulb flickered to life. There, standing just beyond the threshold, was a man. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark hoodie that hid his face in shadow. His eyes glinted in the light, cold and unreadable. I stepped back, heart racing. The bat felt heavy in my hands. He raised a gloved hand slowly, pointing at me, then at the stairs. The voice that came out was low and menacing. "Don't scream. Don't make a sound." I shook my head, unable to speak. Panic surged through me, freezing my limbs. He stepped into the room, eyes scanning quickly. "I'm not here to hurt you, but I need to get inside." I didn't understand. He moved closer, pulling something from his pocket, a small black device, like a remote. "I can cut the power, trap you upstairs. You don't want that." My mind raced. I could call 911, but my phone was downstairs. The man was blocking the only way out. "Just give me your keys and your phone. No one gets hurt," he said. Trembling, I nodded and reached into my nightstand drawer, pulling out my keys and phone. I handed them over without thinking. He pocketed them and moved toward the door. "Stay in your room. Don't follow me," he said. Then he was gone, slipping down the stairs like a shadow. I sat down heavily on the bed, clutching the bat, waiting, heart hammering in my chest. Minutes passed. I heard the back door open, the scrape of shoes on the hardwood, then the soft click of the front door locking. I waited until the sound of footsteps faded completely before carefully stepping into the hallway. I crept downstairs, keeping to the shadows. The house was eerily silent. I checked the front door. It was locked from the outside. The back door was ajar. I closed it, locked it, and ran to the kitchen to grab a knife. I dialed 911, whispering my address. The operator told me officers were en route. I waited, weapon in hand, peering through the blinds. Minutes later, flashing lights bathed the street in red and blue. The man was gone. The officers searched the neighborhood but found no sign of him. They told me he'd likely been casing the house, waiting for the right moment. I stayed with a friend for a week after that. Even now, I sometimes catch myself jumping at shadows or locking the door twice. The man never returned. But sometimes, late at night, I swear I hear tapping on the windows. Story the end.
Story number 4.
It was an ordinary Thursday evening when the nightmare began. I had just returned home after a long day at work, eager for the quiet comfort of my small suburban house. The neighborhood was generally peaceful, a safe place where most people left their doors unlocked and children played outside until dusk. I liked that about it, the kind of place where you felt protected, where threats seemed far away. That illusion shattered in just a few hours. I live alone, and my routine was predictable. I arrived around 6:30 p.m., tossed my keys on the kitchen counter, and switched on some music. I always left the front door locked after I entered, something I prided myself on because I never wanted to feel vulnerable. But that night, I made the mistake of unlocking the back door to bring in groceries, leaving it open just a crack for a moment to carry in a bag. I had the feeling someone was watching me as I moved through the yard, but shrugged it off as paranoia. Around 8 p.m., I was settled in the living room, scrolling through my phone, when the power suddenly cut out. The house went pitch black, and the soft hum of electronics stopped abruptly. At first, I thought it was a power outage in the neighborhood, but the street lights outside were still glowing faintly through the window, and the sound of a car passing by on the road had not ceased. The house was unnervingly silent, except for a low creak from the floorboards behind me. My stomach tightened, and I slowly turned toward the hallway. The front door, which I had locked earlier, stood slightly ajar. My breath caught. No one should have been in my house. I grabbed the heavy metal flashlight I kept in the kitchen drawer and crept down the hallway, heart pounding. The beam of light cut through the darkness, landing on the walls and casting long shadows that seemed to dance just beyond the edges. I called out softly, "Hello? Is someone there?" No answer. As I reached the living room, I saw that the back door was wide open. Cold night air swept in, chilling my skin. I had locked it earlier, or so I thought. Suddenly, a muffled noise came from the basement. It was a faint shuffle like footsteps, but irregular. My mind screamed at me to run, to call the police, but my body felt frozen. I forced myself to move toward the basement door, each step heavier than the last. I flicked the light switch. Nothing. No electricity. The flashlight beam quivered in my hand as I unlocked the basement door. The stairs creaked beneath me as I descended into the darkness. I reached the bottom and shone the light around the room. Boxes were scattered. Shelves had been rummaged through. Something wet and sticky was on the floor. Spilled paint, I hoped, but then I noticed the faint smell of something metallic, like blood. A sudden noise, a heavy thud, came from the far corner. I swung the flashlight in that direction and caught a glimpse of a figure, tall and lean, dressed in black, hunched over. Before I could react, the figure turned and lunged toward me. I stumbled back, hitting the wall hard. The flashlight clattered to the floor, spinning wildly and plunging the room into darkness. I felt hands grab my arms, squeezing tightly. Panic surged through me, and I fought back, kicking and struggling with all my might. After what felt like an eternity, the grip loosened, and the figure bolted up the stairs. I raced after them, the pounding of my heart drowning out everything else. I burst into the living room just in time to see the intruder slip through the back door and disappear into the night. I locked the door behind me and collapsed against it, trembling. The police arrived minutes later, alerted by a neighbor who had heard noises. They searched the property but found no sign of the intruder. I gave them every detail I could remember, but it felt like I was chasing shadows. In the days that followed, I was too scared to stay in the house alone. Strange things started happening. Doors unlocked when I was sure I'd locked them, like objects moved slightly from where I'd left them, And once, late at night, I thought I heard footsteps pacing upstairs. I installed security cameras, changed the locks, and added extra lights around the perimeter, but none of it eased my fear. One night, while reviewing footage from the cameras, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Around 3 a.m., a shadowy figure appeared at the edge of the driveway. They moved slowly, almost methodically, lingering at the back door. The figure was hooded, face hidden in darkness. Then, unexpectedly, the figure crouched and pulled a knife from their jacket, a thin, sharp blade that gleamed faintly in the infrared light. The figure pressed the blade against the doorframe and started to pry. I called the police immediately, but by the time they arrived, the intruder had vanished. The door was scratched and splintered but had held. I realized then that this person had been watching me for weeks, waiting for the right moment to strike. I was not safe in my own home. Eventually, I moved out, leaving the house behind, but the memory still haunts me. I never found out who that intruder was or why they chose me, but sometimes when I lie awake at night, I feel like they're still out there, just beyond the reach of the lights, waiting for another chance. Story the end.
Story number 5.
The night was unusually quiet for a Friday in early spring, the kind of quiet that settled into the bones and made the air feel heavier than usual. I was alone in my 2-bedroom townhouse, about a mile from the nearest convenience store, and nestled in a suburb that normally felt safe. My roommate had gone out of town for the weekend, and I had planned to spend the night binge watching a new series while working from home. It was late, just after midnight, when everything started to unravel. I remember feeling a little off earlier in the evening, but I brushed it off, just tired from a long week. I locked the doors and windows before settling in on the couch with my laptop and some takeout. The lights were dimmed, the TV volume low. The house was silent, except for the hum of my laptop fan and the occasional car driving past on the street. At some point, I paused the show and went to the kitchen to grab a drink. The fridge light was the only illumination as I opened the door. That's when I heard it, a faint tapping sound coming from the back door. It was soft, almost rhythmic, like a cautious knocking. I froze, staring at the door through the glass panel. No one should be there. I live alone and it was past midnight. I slowly moved closer, heart starting to beat faster. My hand hovered over the deadbolt. I turned the knob slightly and the door was locked. The tapping stopped. I waited, my breath visible in the cold air of the kitchen, straining to hear any other sound. Nothing. I shrugged, trying to convince myself it was a branch or an animal. I locked the door again, and this time I engaged the chain lock. Then I went back to the couch, but the sense of unease lingered. An hour later, I got up to stretch and noticed something else. The porch light outside was off. I was almost sure I had left it on earlier. I went to the front door to check and flicked the switch. Nothing happened. The bulb had been unscrewed or removed. That was when the pit formed in my stomach. I double-checked every window and door, sliding locks into place and drawing the curtains closed. Then I called my roommate, who was out of town, and told her about the bulb. She told me to call the police if I felt unsafe, but I didn't want to overreact. I turned on every light in the house and sat back down to try to focus on my show. Minutes later, I heard the softest scrape at the back door, the sound of something moving across the wood porch. My first instinct was to call 911, but I hesitated. What if it was someone lost? A neighbor? I grabbed a baseball bat from under the couch and moved silently toward the kitchen again. I peered through the small window in the back door. There was a shadow, tall and still, a figure standing in the dark just outside the glass. I pulled back quickly. The figure didn't move, just stood there. My phone buzzed in my hand, a text from an unknown number. Let me in. I stared at the message, my heart pounding so loud it felt like it echoed in the room. I called 911, whispering my location and the situation, and was told police were on their way. I sat in the dark living room with the bat, every muscle tense. Then the back door handle started to turn, slowly. Click. Turn. Click. It rattled against the lock. I tried to stay calm, but my fingers trembled around the bat. The handle stopped moving. Silence. I thought the person might be gone. I was wrong. Suddenly, the front door slammed hard. My head snapped toward the noise. Someone was inside. I ran to the front door, heart in my throat, but it was locked. They hadn't used the front door. I realized then that the back door must have been unlocked. I ran back to the kitchen and tried the handle. It moved freely. I yanked it open, expecting to see someone. The porch was empty. I stepped out cautiously, looking around. No footprints in the dew. No sign of anyone. I closed the door and locked it again. I called the police back and told them the door had been unlocked. They promised to send officers soon. I retreated to the bedroom and locked myself in. I sat on the bed, the bat beside me, phone in hand. The minutes dragged. Then I heard it. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, on the wooden floor outside my door. I held my breath. The doorknob twisted. I raised the bat. The door creaked open. A man stepped inside, tall, wearing dark clothes and a hood. His face was mostly hidden, but I saw his eyes. Cold, empty. I swung the bat with everything I had. He staggered back, but didn't run. He lunged toward me. I screamed, fighting for my life. He grabbed my wrist, squeezing tight. I felt panic rising, my mind screaming for escape. Suddenly, the bedroom window shattered. Glass exploded, raining onto the floor. More footsteps. I realized there was another person. They were trying to break in through the window. I kicked and screamed, managing to break free from the man's grip. I ran out the door, naked and bleeding, screaming for help. Neighbors woke up. The intruders fled into the night. Police arrived minutes later, but the men were gone. They found evidence of attempted burglary. My sense of safety shattered. I moved out the next day. The nightmare stayed with me. Every sound at night still sends chills down my spine. I never thought a home, my sanctuary, could turn into a place of terror. Story the end.
Story number 6.
It started as a normal Friday evening. I was living alone in a modest 2-bedroom apartment on the 3rd floor of a building in a quiet suburb. The neighborhood wasn't flashy, but it was safe, or so I thought. My job kept me busy during the day, and the weekends were my time to relax. That Friday night, I was sitting on the couch watching a movie, the volume low, just enough background noise to keep me company. Max, my golden retriever, was sprawled across the rug in front of me, snoozing peacefully. The kitchen window was slightly open to let in the summer breeze, and the sound of cicadas hummed in the background. Around 9 p.m., Max suddenly lifted his head, ears perked, his body stiffening as if sensing something. I paused the movie and looked around the room, feeling a little uneasy but chalking it up to his instincts. Then I heard it, a soft knock at the front door. The building's main entrance was on the ground floor, but there was a fire escape stairwell that led up to my floor, and the door to my apartment opened onto a small landing from those stairs. The knock came again, this time more insistent. I frowned and went to the peephole. Nobody was there. I unlocked the door just a crack to peek out and saw the dim glow of the hallway light, empty. No one. I stepped back, locking the door immediately. Must be the wind, I muttered, though the hallway was enclosed. Max was now growling softly, low and warning. I turned the lock a second time and closed the door. My heart was already beating faster than normal. I returned to the couch and tried to shake off the feeling, telling myself it was nothing. But then I heard the knock again. This time it was coming from the back window, a sliding glass door that led to the small balcony. My stomach dropped. I didn't keep the balcony door locked that night. The lock was flimsy, and I often left it unlocked when Max was with me so he could go out. I froze. The knocking was soft, deliberate, a slow tapping against the glass. I moved silently toward the door, the hairs on my arms standing on end. Peering through the curtains, I could make out a figure on the balcony. A man, tall, wearing a hoodie, his face obscured in shadow. He was tapping on the glass with one finger. I stepped back, heart pounding in my chest. Max growled louder. The man didn't move, didn't speak. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, but the call wouldn't connect. The screen said, "No service." I checked my phone, still no signal. Then I heard the door handle rattle. Not the balcony, the front door. My breath hitched. I bolted to the front door and locked it again. I heard the man on the balcony slide the door open, the sound of glass scraping against the frame. I ran back to the living room, grabbed a heavy wooden chair, and positioned myself near the sliding door. The door was open just enough for the man to squeeze in. Max barked fiercely. The man stepped inside, closing the door behind him quietly. I backed away, chair raised, trying to control the terror swirling inside me. "Please," the man said softly, voice low, "I don't want to hurt you." I didn't say a word. He moved slowly into the room, hands raised. I swung the chair, hitting him in the shoulder. He barely flinched. He lunged toward me, grabbing my wrist. The chair fell. Max jumped on the man, biting and clawing. The man cursed and shoved Max off, then grabbed a heavy vase from the coffee table and swung it. The vase smashed against the wall. I scrambled backward, tripping over the edge of the rug. The man lunged again. Suddenly, a loud crash from the hallway. The front door had been kicked open. 2 more men entered, burly, angry, armed with crowbars. "Grab her!" one shouted. I screamed and tried to scramble away, but one of them grabbed my arm, twisting it painfully behind my back. Max bit the arm of the man holding me. The man yelled and swung at the dog, but Max dodged and growled, refusing to let go. I fought with all my strength, but I was trapped. They dragged me toward the hallway. The first man who entered grabbed a knife from his pocket and pressed it against my side. "Quiet," he hissed. I was terrified, but adrenaline took over. With all my might, I headbutted him. He stumbled back. Max took the chance, biting the man's hand, forcing him to drop the knife. I pushed the man away and ran toward the open balcony door. The other 2 men chased me, shouting. I jumped onto the balcony, then over the railing to the small roof below. I slipped and fell, but I kept moving, running toward the fire escape. I scrambled down the stairs as fast as I could. My phone buzzed. I looked down and saw a text from my neighbor. "Power's out. Cops are coming. Stay safe." I ran to his apartment and banged on the door. He opened, shocked to see me covered in scratches and tears. The police arrived minutes later. They found my apartment ransacked. Drawers pulled open, furniture overturned. The intruders had planned to kidnap me. They'd jammed cell signals, used the blackout to their advantage. They never caught the men. I moved out weeks later. Sometimes I still wake up hearing knocking on the door. The place that was supposed to be my sanctuary was violated in the worst way. No one is truly safe, not even at home. Story, the end.
Story number 7.
The night was cold and still when it began, an ordinary Friday in late November. The kind of night when the wind was just sharp enough to chill you, but not so fierce that it kept people indoors. I was home alone. My wife had gone out of town to visit her parents, and my 2 kids were with her for the weekend. I was supposed to be alone for 2 nights. I had planned on catching up on work and maybe watching a movie or 2. I lived in a modest 2-story house in a quiet neighborhood, one of those places where you don't expect anything bad to happen. You trust your neighbors, you lock your doors out of habit, but you never expect the worst. I had been sitting in my living room, late into the night, working on my laptop. Milo, our large golden retriever, was curled up on the rug beside me, snoring softly. It was just past midnight when I first heard it, a faint noise from outside. At first, I thought it was the wind, or maybe a branch scraping against the siding, but then it came again. A faint but deliberate tapping sound, like someone gently knocking on a window. I froze. Milo lifted his head, ears perked. The house was silent apart from the tapping. My heart rate quickened as I strained to listen. The tapping came again, this time from the kitchen window. I didn't want to believe it was real. I told myself it was just an animal, maybe a stray cat. I forced myself to stand and walked cautiously to the kitchen. The streetlights outside cast long shadows through the rain-spattered glass, but I saw nothing. I locked the kitchen window and turned on the outside lights. I walked around the perimeter of the house to look for any signs of someone. The yard was empty, no footprints, no signs of disturbance. I went back inside, telling Milo everything was fine, but the feeling in my gut wouldn't go away. I checked the locks on all the doors again. Everyone was secure. I even bolted the deadbolt on the front door twice for good measure. About an hour later, around 1:15 a.m., I heard it again. This time, the front door. It wasn't a knock, but the faintest click of the lock being fiddled with. I stopped breathing. Milo growled low in his throat. I crept to the front door and looked through the peephole. No one was there, but the lock on the deadbolt was no longer fully engaged. Someone had been messing with it. I grabbed my phone and tried to call my wife, but it went straight to voicemail. I tried my cell, but there was no signal. I even tried calling 911, but the line was dead. Panic began to set in. I locked the door again, this time pushing with all my strength to make sure it held. I backed away and listened. For the next half hour, the house was eerily quiet except for Milo's occasional growls. Then I heard footsteps on the porch, slow, deliberate. Someone was walking back and forth outside my front door. Then the porch light went out. I didn't think. I grabbed the baseball bat I kept by the couch and stood by the window, watching. The door handle rattled. Hard. Someone was trying to get in. I whispered Milo's name. He ran to the door and barked fiercely. The door shook again. Then suddenly, the power went out completely. The house went black. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight app, the glow weak in the thick darkness. I heard a loud crash from the back of the house. Someone had broken a window. Milo barked and ran to the back door. I followed, locking it behind me and grabbing a kitchen knife from the counter. I stood in the dark hallway, flashlight in one hand, knife in the other. The rain pounded outside, the wind howling through the broken window. I heard heavy footsteps coming through the hallway. The intruder was inside. I backed into the living room, trying to stay calm. Suddenly, a shadow appeared at the top of the stairs. I held my breath. Then the footsteps came down the stairs, slow, steady, and very close. Milo growled, stepping protectively in front of me. The intruder stepped into the light of the hallway. It was a man. His face was partially covered by a hood, his eyes cold and calculating. He held a crowbar. I raised the knife. "Get out," I said, voice shaking. He didn't say a word. He moved forward. I swung the knife, catching him in the arm. He yelped and stumbled back. I ran to the front door, trying to open it. It was locked. He lunged at me. I fell to the floor, the knife slipping from my hand. Milo jumped on him, biting his arm. The man screamed and tried to shake Milo off. I scrambled to the stairs, shouting for help. The man pushed Milo away and ran upstairs. I heard him kicking open the door to the master bedroom. I ran up the stairs, grabbing the bat again. He was inside, rifling through drawers. I swung the bat with everything I had. It connected with his head. He collapsed, unconscious. I called 911 on my cell, finally getting a signal. The police arrived within minutes. They found the man tied up in my bedroom, bloodied but alive. He was arrested on the spot. Afterwards, I learned he had been casing the neighborhood for weeks. He knew I was alone. He wanted to steal valuables but was ready to hurt anyone who got in his way. The night haunted me for months. I couldn't sleep. Every creak made me jump. But I survived, and I learned how fragile safety really is. Story the end.
Story number 8.
It was late November when I first noticed something was wrong. I had just moved into my new house, a modest 2-story in a quiet suburban neighborhood, and I was eager to start fresh. The previous owner had left in a hurry, and the realtor assured me the place was safe and well maintained. The neighborhood was the kind where people left their doors unlocked during the day, where kids played in yards and neighbors waved as you passed by. I was working from home at the time, which gave me the luxury of spending most of my days inside, slowly unpacking and settling in. The house had a basement and an attic, both empty and untouched, giving me a sense of space and possibility. About a week into living there, I began hearing strange noises. At first, it was easy to dismiss. A creak here, a thump there. Old houses do that. But the noises kept coming, always late at night, always faint but distinct. It sounded like footsteps. Not the slow, half-random creaks of a settling house, but deliberate footsteps walking across the hardwood floors. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe the heating system kicking on or the pipes expanding. But the feeling of being watched grew stronger. One night I was working late on my laptop in the living room when I heard the sound of the front door opening. It was quiet but unmistakable, the soft click of the lock turning. My heart stopped. I froze, staring at the door. I knew I had locked it before I started working. I debated calling the police, but thought maybe I'd just forgotten. Slowly, I crept to the door and looked through the peephole. Nothing. No one outside. I opened the door cautiously, peering out into the dark porch. No footprints in the fresh snow, no signs of forced entry. The next morning, I found a note taped to the inside of the front door. Written in messy, hurried handwriting were the words, "I'm watching." I called the police and filed a report, but without evidence, they told me there wasn't much they could do. They advised me to install cameras and stay vigilant. I took their advice, installing cameras at the front and back doors and motion sensors around the perimeter. For a few days, nothing happened. Then one evening, as I was cooking dinner, My phone buzzed with an alert from one of the cameras. I opened the live feed and saw a man standing on my front porch. He was wearing a dark hoodie and a mask that covered the lower half of his face. He held a crowbar in one hand. He stared directly into the camera for a long moment, then lifted the crowbar and slammed it against the front door. The sound echoed through the feed, loud and violent. I grabbed my phone and called 911. The dispatcher assured me officers were on their way. I locked myself in the basement and sat trembling in the dark. Minutes later, flashing lights appeared outside, and I heard the man running away through the backyard. The officers searched the area but found no trace of him. In the days that followed, I received more messages, some typed, some handwritten, left on the porch or taped to windows. They were threats, warnings to leave the house. I stayed with friends for a few nights, but every time I returned, I felt like the man was still there, waiting. One night, I woke to the sound of glass breaking downstairs. I grabbed the baseball bat I kept by the bed and crept toward the noise. In the living room, a window was shattered, shards scattered across the floor. I heard a noise behind me and spun around to see the man standing in the doorway, crowbar in hand. He lunged, and I swung the bat with all my strength. We struggled, the crowbar hitting the floor. I managed to push him back and ran to the phone to call 911. He bolted out the broken window and disappeared into the night. The police arrived quickly and took me to the station for a report. They caught the man a few days later in a neighboring town. It turned out he had a criminal history, including burglary and stalking. He confessed to targeting my house because of its isolation and the cameras, which he thought he could disable. Since then, I've moved to a new place, far from that neighborhood. But every time I hear a noise at night, my heart still races. Story the end.
Story number 9.
The evening started like any other in late October, cool and calm, with the sun dipping low behind the row of maple trees that lined our quiet suburban street. I had just returned home from work, exhausted after a 12-hour shift at the hospital. My wife, Emily, had gone out with friends, so I was alone in the house, or so I thought. Our neighborhood was the kind where you left your doors unlocked and your kids played freely. Crime was almost non-existent. I never thought twice about locking the back door, especially on a night like this when a gentle breeze carried the scent of autumn leaves and distant wood smoke. I kicked off my shoes at the door, set down my bag, and headed to the kitchen to grab a cold beer. The house felt peaceful. The only sounds the faint hum of the refrigerator and the ticking clock on the wall. Then I heard it. A soft knock at the back door. I froze. It was faint, hesitant. Maybe someone had the wrong house? But who knocks so softly at 8 p.m.? I walked cautiously to the door and peeked through the window. No one was there. Maybe a prankster, I thought, and I tried to shake off the uneasy feeling settling in my chest. I closed the door and locked it, then went back to the living room. 20 minutes later, I was sprawled on the couch watching an old movie when I heard it again. Tapping. This time it was on the front window, rhythmic and deliberate. I got up, heart hammering, and slowly approached the window. The porch light flickered, casting shifting shadows across the yard. Peering out, I saw nothing. I told myself it was probably a branch brushing in the wind. Then the power went out. Just like that, everything went dark. No lights, no TV, no street lamps. The only illumination was the pale moonlight filtering through the curtains. I grabbed my phone, but there was no signal. My breath quickened. I checked the front door. It was unlocked. I was sure I'd locked it. I locked it again and moved to check the back door. It, too, was ajar. I felt a cold spike of terror. Someone was inside the house. I grabbed the kitchen knife from the counter, a meager weapon, but better than nothing. I dialed 911 on my phone. No connection. I tried the landline. Dead. I realized with a sinking feeling that whoever was inside had cut the power and disabled the phones. The house was too quiet now, except for the faint sound of movement upstairs. I crept toward the staircase, knife clutched tightly, every nerve screaming. At the bottom of the stairs, I paused and listened. Footsteps. Slow, methodical footsteps. They weren't running, they were searching. I backed into the kitchen and quietly slid the door shut behind me. I looked out the window. An empty street. Empty yard. I felt trapped. The footsteps climbed higher. I moved toward the basement door, the only place I could barricade myself. I locked it and dragged a heavy dresser against the door. I dialed 911 again, this time through the internet on my phone. Miraculously, it connected. I whispered into the phone, telling the dispatcher about the intruder. She told me to stay put and that officers were on the way. Suddenly, the front door creaked open. A dark silhouette filled the doorway. I raised the knife. He stepped in. A man in dark clothes, his face shadowed by a hood. He smiled, a cruel, empty smile. He said, "Don't make this harder than it has to be." I lunged, slashing wildly. He caught my arm easily and twisted it behind my back. I felt the breath leave my lungs. Then he dragged me toward the living room. Suddenly, sirens blared outside. The man cursed and pushed me away. He bolted out the door. The police stormed in seconds later, guns drawn. They found evidence the man had been there for hours. A backpack with tools, gloves, a knife. They told me he was a serial burglar linked to several home invasions. I learned later that he'd been watching my house for weeks, waiting for the right time. After that night, I couldn't stay in the house alone. Every creak made me jump. Every shadow seemed alive. I moved out within a month, but the terror never left. Sometimes in the darkest nights, I still hear that slow, deliberate footsteps echoing in my mind. Story the end.
Story number 10.
It was a chilly November evening when I moved into my new apartment on the edge of town. The place was older but affordable, and honestly, I was just glad to finally have a spot of my own after years of living with roommates. I'd always been careful with safety, locked doors, checked windows, never left things unattended. But I didn't think twice about this place. The neighborhood was quiet, the building secure, and the landlord assured me it had never had any problems. The first few days passed without incident. I unpacked, arranged my things, and settled into my routine. But on the third night, around 2 a.m., I woke up to a strange sound, a faint scratching noise coming from the living room. At first, I thought it might be the heating system or a loose window frame rattling in the wind. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, but the scratching grew louder and more deliberate, like someone tapping on the walls or trying to pry something open. I lay still, straining to hear more. My phone was on the bedside table, but I didn't want to alert whoever or whatever might be outside. The scratching stopped suddenly. I told myself it was probably a branch brushing against the siding or a stray animal outside. I fell back asleep, but uneasily. The next day, I checked the doors and windows carefully. Everything was locked tight, no signs of forced entry. I told myself I was just being paranoid. Maybe the stress of the move was getting to me. That night, I went to bed early, hoping to put the previous night behind me. Around midnight, I heard it again. This time, a faint creaking sound from the hallway outside my bedroom. I grabbed my phone and flashlight and crept out of bed. The hallway was pitch black, the light from my phone barely cutting through the darkness. I moved slowly toward the living room door, heart pounding. The creaking sound grew louder, like slow footsteps on the wooden floor. I flicked on the flashlight and swung it toward the doorway. The door was ajar. I froze. The lock was intact, but someone had clearly pushed it open. I heard a faint shuffling sound just beyond the door. I swallowed hard, backing away to the kitchen where I kept a knife for cooking. My hands shook as I gripped it. I dialed 911 on my phone, whispering my address. The operator told me to stay quiet and remain on the line. I stayed in the kitchen, knife ready, listening. Footsteps approached the kitchen slowly. I could hear breathing, uneven, heavy. The kitchen window was closed, but suddenly I heard the latch being tampered with. I rushed over and slammed my hand down, locking it. The footsteps retreated slightly, but didn't disappear. Suddenly the front door creaked. I ran to the living room and peered out through the peephole. Outside stood a man, mid-30s, wearing a black hoodie with his face partly obscured. His eyes darted around nervously. I backed away and called out through the door, asking who he was. No answer. He tried the handle. Locked. I yelled I was calling the police. He cursed under his breath and stepped away. The operator told me officers were on the way, but I didn't feel safe waiting. I barricaded the bedroom door with a chair and sat on the bed, clutching the knife. After what felt like hours, the police arrived. They searched the building but found no sign of the man. I stayed with a friend for a few nights after that. The landlord later told me the previous tenant had been robbed at gunpoint, and the police suspected the same man was responsible. The most terrifying part was realizing how close I had come to something much worse. That night, someone had been inside my apartment, watching me, waiting. I never took safety for granted again. Story the end.
Story number 11.
The clock on the wall read 11:47 p.m. as I sat alone in my small suburban house. The quiet hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of settling wood, the only sounds breaking the silence. I was almost done with a long day of work, still awake after my third cup of coffee, staring at my laptop and trying to wrap up some last-minute emails. The rest of the neighborhood had long gone to sleep. My wife and kids were away visiting family, so I was by myself, savoring the rare solitude. I had always prided myself on feeling safe in this neighborhood. It was peaceful, with friendly neighbors who watched out for one another, but that night, something felt off. Around midnight, I heard the faintest sound, almost like a soft thud, then a scrape coming from the back of the house. I froze, eyes fixed on the dim glow of the laptop screen. My heart started to beat faster, but I convinced myself it was just the wind, or maybe a branch brushing the window. Then the power flickered and died. The house plunged into darkness. The only light came from the soft amber glow of my phone, which I grabbed instinctively. Max, our old Labrador, who had been asleep at my feet, perked up, ears alert and eyes wide. I got up slowly and moved toward the back window, peering through the blinds. The backyard was pitch black, but I could make out a dark figure moving between the shadows cast by the trees. My throat tightened. I reached for the cordless phone on the kitchen counter, but there was no dial tone. I texted my neighbor Lisa, but the message wouldn't send. I tried calling 911, but no luck. The power outage must have knocked out the phone lines and cell towers. I locked the front door, double-checked every window I could reach, and grabbed the baseball bat from the closet. I wasn't sure what to do next. My mind raced. Suddenly, the back door handle jiggled violently. The old wooden door rattled against the frame. Max growled, a low rumble deep in his chest. I tiptoed toward the kitchen where the door was, heart pounding. I peered through the small window inset into the door. The figure was there. A man, tall, wearing dark clothes and a ski mask pulled down over his face. He was trying to force the door open. I backed away, pressing my back against the wall. The door shuddered again, then crashed inward as the man broke the lock. Before I could react, 2 more men stepped through the doorway behind him. They moved quickly, closing in on me. I swung the bat at the first intruder, hitting him squarely in the chest. He grunted, but kept coming. Max lunged, biting the ankle of the second man, who screamed and kicked at the dog. The third man grabbed me by the arm, dragging me toward the hallway. I screamed for help, but there was no one to hear me. They forced me into the living room, throwing me onto the couch. The 3 men spread out, ransacking the house, tossing drawers open, searching for valuables. I sat frozen, heart racing, tears stinging my eyes. One of them knelt beside me, pulling a knife from his belt. "Be quiet," he hissed, pressing the blade lightly against my throat. I nodded, swallowing hard. They tied my hands with zip ties they found in the kitchen. The men whispered among themselves, clearly waiting for something. I realized the power was still out. The house plunged in darkness except for the faint moonlight filtering through the curtains. Minutes passed, each second stretching like an eternity. Suddenly, one of the men moved toward the front door. I heard footsteps outside, then voices. My heart leapt. The front door burst open. 2 police officers rushed in, flashlights sweeping the room. The intruders panicked. One tried to run toward the back door, but Max snarled and bit his leg, bringing him down. The other 2 were quickly subdued by the officers. I collapsed into sobs, overwhelmed and shaken. The police told me the men had been breaking into houses in the area during the blackout, targeting homes with no power and no cell service. They were part of a group that had been casing the neighborhood for weeks, using signal jammers to block communication. I spent the night at the police station giving statements and answering questions. When I returned home the next day, the place felt violated, unsafe. I installed a security system, changed all the locks, and made plans to move out. But the memories lingered. Every creak of the house, every unexpected noise sent me into a panic. I never thought I'd be a victim in my own home. It's a feeling I wouldn't wish on anyone. Story, the end.
Story number 12.
It was mid-November when the incident happened, and the cold had started to creep in sharply during the nights. I had moved into a small two-bedroom house on the edge of town, a quiet place surrounded by open fields and a tree line that bordered the backyard. I picked the house because it was cheap, had decent insulation, and the neighbors, while a little spread out, seemed nice enough during the day. I didn't think much about the lack of streetlights on our cul-de-sac or the fact that the backyard backed directly into a patch of woods. It just seemed peaceful. My job required me to work odd hours, often from home in the evenings and sometimes late into the night. That Tuesday night, I was up later than usual trying to finish a project for my job. My home office sat at the front of the house with a view of the gravel driveway and the road. Around midnight, I took a break, stretching and rubbing my eyes, when I noticed something that instantly gave me pause. The porch light, which I always left on, was off. That might not sound alarming on its own, but I distinctly remember turning it on after sunset. I went to the front window and looked outside. The driveway was empty, except for my car, and everything else was silent. Still, it unsettled me. I walked to the switch near the door and flipped it up and down. Nothing. No light. Maybe the bulb had gone out. I opened the door and stepped out onto the front porch, shivering as the cold night air hit me. I glanced up at the fixture and was about to unscrew the bulb to check it when I noticed it was missing. Not broken. Gone. Someone had unscrewed it. That was the first time I felt real fear crawl up my spine. I backed into the house slowly, locked the door, and double-checked the deadbolt. I even slid the chain lock into place. My heart was thumping as I went room to room, checking the windows. All locked. I told myself it was probably some neighborhood kids playing a prank, but something about the silence outside, the emptiness, made it feel more deliberate. I sat back at my desk, half focused on my laptop, and tried to brush it off. About 20 minutes later, I heard a soft knock on the back door. It was so light I almost thought I imagined it. My office doesn't face the back of the house, but I froze, staring at my screen as if not moving would make it go away. Then it came again, soft, almost polite. I don't get visitors that time of night. I certainly don't get them at the back door, which leads onto a patio in the tree line just beyond. No sidewalk, no lights, just darkness. I got up as quietly as I could and tiptoed through the living room. The only illumination came from a small lamp in the corner, barely enough to light the room. I peeked around the corner to the kitchen, which leads to the back door. There was a shape tall and still standing just outside the frosted glass of the back door. They weren't knocking anymore, just standing there. Motionless. I couldn't make out the face, only a vague outline. I didn't move, I didn't breathe. I waited, thinking maybe they'd leave. But after what felt like 10 full minutes, the figure just stayed there. I backed away slowly and returned to my office, locking the door behind me. I picked up my phone and dialed 911. The dispatcher answered quickly, and I whispered that someone was at my back door and I was alone. They told me to stay on the line and not confront anyone. Officers were on their way, but that's when the clicking started. Soft, metallic clicking. At first, I couldn't place it. Then I realized it was the back door's handle being turned slowly, repeatedly. The intruder was trying to test if it was unlocked. When it didn't budge, the handle would rattle gently, stop, and then resume again in a minute or so. The dispatcher was calm and professional, but I could hear her typing quickly as I whispered updates. Suddenly, the clicking stopped. Silence again. I didn't dare go to the kitchen. I didn't want to see the silhouette again. The dispatcher was telling me to stay calm when something crashed at the other end of the house. Glass shattering. The guest bedroom. I whispered that to her, barely getting the words out. My voice was trembling. "Is there somewhere you can hide?" she asked. I turned toward my closet. It was shallow and barely fit my hanging clothes, but I pushed things aside and squeezed in, phone pressed to my ear. I heard footsteps inside the house. Slow, deliberate, heavy. It was as if they weren't in a rush. They knew I was in there. They wanted me to know they were coming. "Police are about 5 minutes away," the dispatcher said. "Stay hidden. Stay quiet." The footsteps moved through the living room, then the kitchen. I could hear things being touched, drawers opening, cabinet doors swinging shut. They weren't trying to steal anything. They were looking for me. Then I heard a soft creak outside my office door. I hadn't locked it. My mistake. The door opened. I saw the shadows shift under the crack of the closet door. They were inside the room. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might give me away. Whoever it was stood there for a long time, not moving. I covered my mouth. The dispatcher's voice in my ear was a soft murmur, telling me help was close. Then the closet door handle moved. I don't remember deciding to do it. I just remember screaming and kicking the door open with all my strength. I must have caught them by surprise because I shoved them back a few steps. I ran. I sprinted out of the room, down the hall, through the living room, and out the front door. I didn't look back. I didn't care that it was freezing, that I was barefoot. I ran straight to my neighbor's house, banging on the door like a madman. They let me in. They called the police again. The officers arrived 2 minutes later. When they went through my house, the intruder was gone. The back bedroom window was shattered, just as I'd heard. The front door was wide open. They said I was lucky to be alive. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was when they checked the front yard. They found footprints. Lots of them. Multiple people. One set had circled the house several times. Another had stood by the tree line at the back. Another had been near my bedroom window. There had been more than one person that night, and only one had come inside. The others had been waiting, watching, just in case I ran. They never caught them. No fingerprints, no suspects. They told me it might have been a gang initiation or a random act, but something about the way they waited, the way they tried to flush me out instead of just breaking in, didn't feel random. I moved a week later. I still don't sleep through the night. Every creak in the floor, every branch scraping the window jolts me awake, and I don't live near the woods anymore. Not ever again. Story the end.
Story number 13.
The house we moved into was a fixer-upper. Nothing dramatic, just an older ranch-style home built in the late 70s that had a lot of potential and character. It sat at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac in a small town in Missouri, surrounded by thick woods that made it feel secluded. Peaceful. At least that's what we thought when my husband Nate and I bought it. We moved in the first week of September, just in time for the trees to start changing color. It was our dream to get away from the city, have space, start a family. The first few weeks were full of boxes, paint fumes, and that weird feeling you get when a place still doesn't feel like yours yet. But we were happy. Tired, but happy. One night, maybe 3 weeks after moving in, I was alone. Nate had gone on a short work trip to Kansas City just overnight. I wasn't thrilled to be alone in a new house, especially one surrounded by woods, but I figured I'd be fine. We had working locks, a solid front door, and we weren't the kind of people who scared easily. That night, I stayed up watching a documentary in the living room. Around 11:15 p.m., I heard what sounded like a branch hitting the window in the guest bedroom down the hall. I paused the TV and listened. The wind had picked up, and I thought it could have been that, maybe a loose shutter or a tree limb. I walked down the hallway and peeked into the guest room. Everything looked normal. I pulled the curtain back just to be sure. Nothing, just dark trees swaying in the wind. I went back to the living room, hit play, and tried to forget about it. Then I heard it again, this time from the kitchen. A soft, deliberate knock. Not a branch. Not the wind. Knuckles. My body stiffened. I muted the TV and listened. The knock didn't come again, but I was sure of what I heard. It had a rhythm to it. Purpose. I turned off the TV, stood still in the living room, and looked toward the kitchen. The light was off in there, but there was a dim glow from the street lamp outside coming through the window above the sink. That's when I saw it. A figure. Just standing there outside the kitchen window. Close. Too close. Pressed up against the glass, their face just out of the light. I couldn't make out features, just the outline of a man. Tall, broad shoulders, watching. I couldn't move. We didn't have curtains up in the kitchen yet. I cursed myself for that. I took a shaky step back, then another. The figure didn't move. Didn't tap again. Just stood there, staring in. I backed into the hallway and ducked into the bedroom, my heart in my throat. I grabbed my phone and called 911. No answer. It didn't even ring. No dial tone. Just silence. I stared at the screen, confused, then checked the signal. 0 bars. I tried to restart the phone, and as I did, I heard a sound that made my skin crawl. Metal squealing. The back door. We had a screen door that squeaked loudly when opened. It was unmistakable. Someone was trying to get in. I grabbed the baseball bat Nate kept by the nightstand and crept toward the kitchen. The figure at the window was gone now. I moved slowly, peeking around the corner. The door was still shut, but the handle was jiggling. Someone was trying it softly, methodically. I called out, "I'm calling the police." Nothing. The jiggling stopped. I held my breath. Then a voice, soft, male, calm. "You don't have to do that. Just let me in." I didn't respond. The voice spoke again. "I know you're alone. I just want to talk." I stepped backward into the hallway and locked myself in the bathroom. I couldn't think. My hands were shaking. My phone still wasn't working. Then came the pounding. Not from the kitchen door this time. From the front. Violent. Aggressive. Like someone was trying to break it down. I jumped. My heart slammed into my ribs. I ran to the bedroom window and peeked out. Another man was at the front door, this one wearing a hoodie, hunched, slamming his shoulder into the wood. There were two of them. I dropped to the floor, crawling away from the window. This was not random. This was not some drunk guy who picked the wrong house. This was planned. I slid under the bed and pulled the comforter down to hide myself. I heard glass shatter, maybe the back door window. Then the unmistakable creak of the door opening. They were inside. I could hear their footsteps, slow, confident, talking to each other like they were shopping in a store. "She's here. I saw her in the window earlier," one of them said. "Check the rooms," the other replied. I covered my mouth with both hands to stop myself from making a sound. My breathing was shallow. My body felt like it was vibrating with terror. They went through every room, opening doors, moving furniture, laughing quietly. I heard one of them enter the bedroom. His boots hit the hardwood like gunshots. He opened the closet, pulled open drawers, then he paused. I could hear him breathing. He crouched next to the bed. My heart stopped. He didn't lift the blanket, didn't look under. He just sat there. "You under there?" he said, low and amused. I stayed frozen. Then he leaned forward and whispered, "I'm going to find you. Might as well come out now." He stood up and walked out. I stayed under the bed for what felt like forever. I could hear them moving to the other side of the house. Then silence. No footsteps. No voices. I waited. And then I saw something that nearly made me scream. A hand. Sliding under the bed slowly, fingers feeling around, just inches from my face. I jerked back involuntarily, hitting the wall with a thud. The hand disappeared. Then came the voice again. "There you are." I scrambled out from under the bed on the far side and ran for the hallway, clutching the bat. I could hear him yelling behind me, calling to the other guy. I made it to the front door. It was still intact, surprisingly, but the locks were broken. I yanked it open and ran barefoot into the yard. They were right behind me. I didn't look back. I tore across the lawn, down the street. I saw a porch light on a few houses away and sprinted toward it, banging on the door. A man opened it, startled, and I shoved past him, screaming for help. He locked the door and called the police. By the time they arrived, the intruders were gone. They never caught them. The police found evidence of forced entry through the back door. They'd smashed the small window, reached in, and unlocked it. There were muddy footprints all through the house. And something else, something I still have nightmares about. In the attic, the police found a small sleeping bag, food wrappers, and a duffel bag with rope, duct tape, and a hunting knife. They think at least one of them had been hiding in the attic for days, watching me. My phone, by the way, wasn't broken. They'd brought a small signal jammer and plugged it into an outlet behind the couch while I was in the bedroom. I never heard them. Nate and I sold the house and moved back to the city. Sometimes, when it's quiet, I still feel like someone's watching. I double-check the locks every night. We installed cameras, alarms, everything. But no matter how much security you have, nothing prepares you for the moment you realize someone was already inside, watching, waiting. Story the end.
Story number 14.
The night started quietly enough. I had just finished a late dinner and was settling into the couch with a book. It was an unusually cold evening for late spring, the kind where you'd want to keep the windows shut tight, but I'd left one open, just a crack in the kitchen to let in some fresh air. I live alone in a small 2-story house in a quiet neighborhood, the kind of neighborhood where everyone knows each other and nothing much ever happens. I was about halfway through my book when I heard a faint noise. At first, I thought it was the wind, but then it came again. A soft creak from the back door. I froze and listened. The house was silent except for the occasional sound of the neighborhood, a dog barking far away, a car passing by. But the creak was too deliberate, too close. I put my book down and quietly moved to the kitchen. The back door, which I always lock, was slightly ajar. My heart skipped a beat. I always made sure the door was locked before I went to bed. Someone had to be here. I grabbed the biggest kitchen knife I could find and slowly closed the door, locking it again. I turned the deadbolt twice, feeling the cold metal slide into place. I backed away, my hands trembling. The hairs on my neck stood up. I moved back into the living room and called the police on my cell phone. The line was dead. No signal. I tried the landline, but there was only static. Panic started to build. I thought about calling my neighbor, but it was late and I didn't want to put anyone else in danger. Instead, I dialed 911 on the landline. The call went through, but there was no response, just a ringing tone that never stopped. Then it cut off. I realized the intruder must have cut the phone lines. I needed to protect myself. I locked all the doors and windows I could, then retreated to my bedroom, knife in hand. I grabbed my phone again to text my wife, but no service. The footsteps started then. Upstairs. I live alone, and all my rooms are upstairs except the kitchen and living room downstairs. The footsteps were slow and heavy. Someone was walking through my house. Not running, not panicked, just methodical, searching. I pressed my back against the bedroom door and listened. The footsteps stopped outside. I held my breath. The door handle jiggled. I tightened my grip on the knife. The knob turned slowly. The door creaked. I prepared to fight. The door didn't open. After a few seconds, the footsteps moved away. I stayed frozen for a long time, waiting. Then I heard a noise downstairs, in the kitchen. My mind raced. I needed to escape, but the front door was locked, and the back door was also locked just a moment ago. I crept to the window and peered out. The street was dark, no cars or people. I heard a drawer slide open in the kitchen. The intruder was searching for something. I scanned the room for anything I could use as a weapon, a heavy pan, a broomstick. Suddenly, the lights flickered on. The intruder must have found the breaker. I raised the knife and stepped toward the stairs. "Who's there?" I shouted. No answer. I moved cautiously upstairs, following the sounds. At the top of the stairs, I saw a shadow dart behind the hallway wall. "Stop! Call the police!" I yelled. The figure froze. I lunged forward and tackled the intruder to the floor. We struggled. I managed to stab the man in the arm with the knife. He howled in pain. He was a stranger, wearing a mask pulled halfway down his face, revealing cold, hard eyes. I screamed for help, but no one came. He tried to wrestle the knife away, but I fought back with everything I had. After several minutes, he broke free and ran down the stairs. I chased him, but he was faster. He slipped out the front door and disappeared into the night. I locked the door behind him and called the police again. This time, the line worked. Officers arrived quickly and searched the house and yard. They found evidence that the intruder had been inside for hours, rifling through drawers and cupboards. The police told me this man was a serial burglar in the area, known for home invasions late at night. I spent the next few days in a hotel, unable to return to the house. I installed security cameras and an alarm system, but I still can't shake the fear. Some nights I wake up thinking I hear footsteps on the stairs. The idea that someone was inside my home watching me, waiting, it's a nightmare I won't forget. Story the end.
Story number 15.
It was just after the new year when the incident happened. I remember because the Christmas lights were still up on some houses in our neighborhood, blinking weakly through the early evening fog. I had moved into that house with my husband Patrick less than 6 months prior. It was in a quiet residential area on the edge of town, far enough away from the noise and chaos of city life, but not too remote. The houses were spaced far enough apart that you didn't feel crowded, but close enough that if you screamed, someone might hear you. At least, that's what I believed. Patrick worked nights at a hospital, usually gone from around 6 p.m. until 6 or 7 a.m. I was used to being alone during the evenings and had gotten pretty comfortable with the solitude. We didn't have kids, just the two of us and our black Labrador, Milo, who normally barked at every sound but was surprisingly calm most nights. The house itself was modest, 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, nothing fancy. We hadn't even finished furnishing the spare rooms yet. It was a Thursday night, just after 10 p.m. I was curled up on the couch watching some mindless sitcom reruns, still in my work clothes with a half-eaten bowl of cereal on the coffee table. Milo was lying by the fireplace, snoring softly. I remember thinking it was unusually quiet outside. Normally, I could hear at least some cars passing or the occasional bark from a neighbor's dog. But that night it was dead silent, like the air was holding its breath. Then I heard it. A knock. Not loud, not hurried, just a single soft knock. Not on the front door either. It came from the back of the house. I sat up straight, straining to listen. Milo didn't move. I paused the TV and stood up slowly, trying not to make a sound. I thought maybe I imagined it or it was something falling outside. But then it happened again, 3 gentle taps, deliberate and spaced apart. My stomach twisted. The back door was in the kitchen, which had a sliding glass door that opened to the backyard. I hadn't turned the porch light on, so I couldn't see anything outside. I crept to the hallway and reached for the light switch that illuminated the backyard. My hand hovered there for a second, hesitating. Then I flipped it on. Nothing. No one on the porch. No movement in the yard. I told myself it was the wind. Maybe a tree branch. Maybe even an animal. I turned the TV back on and tried to settle back into the couch, but something about the knock just didn't sit right with me. It wasn't the sound itself, it was the way it happened. It felt intentional. I was about 20 minutes into a new episode when Milo suddenly stood up, ears perked. He walked to the hallway and stared toward the kitchen. He let out a low growl, then turned and looked at me. Then came the knock again. Only this time it was at the front door. I froze. Milo barked, loud and sharp. He trotted toward the door, tail stiff, growling deep in his throat. I walked slowly to the entryway, keeping my distance from the window. I looked through the peephole. No one was there. I felt the bottom drop out of my stomach. I stood there for a long moment, unsure what to do. I checked the lock. It was secure. I backed away and went into the kitchen, phone in hand. I wanted to call Patrick, but I knew he couldn't answer while he was working. I dialed anyway. It went straight to voicemail. I turned off the light in the kitchen and pressed my face against the side window, peering into the dark yard. Again, nothing. I went back to the living room and turned off the TV. I sat in silence, listening. I swear I could hear something. Not footsteps exactly, but the unmistakable sound of movement. Leaves crunching, a soft shuffle of someone walking in grass. Then the porch light flickered and went out. I gasped. I hadn't seen anyone, but I knew I was being watched. I could feel it. Milo barked again, but this time it sounded more frantic. He ran to the back door and scratched at it, whining. Then the power went out. Just gone. Darkness swallowed the room, and the only sound was my dog whimpering and the blood pounding in my ears. I fumbled for my phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam was weak, but enough to cut through the dark as I tried to figure out what to do next. I thought about calling 911, but didn't know if this even counted as an emergency yet. There was no break-in, just a few knocks, but something told me this wasn't over. I made my way to the guest room where we kept a small emergency kit. I grabbed a flashlight and the baseball bat Patrick had left under the bed. Milo followed me, his tail tucked. That's when I heard the sound that made my heart drop. The sound of glass shattering. I didn't even have to check. I knew it was the laundry room window. Whoever had been knocking was now inside. I grabbed Milo and we ran to the master bedroom, slamming the door behind us and locking it. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely dial. This time I called 911. It rang, and then nothing. The call dropped. No signal. I tried again. Still nothing. The signal bar flickered between 1 and 0. I pressed my ear to the bedroom door. I could hear footsteps now. Heavy, slow, deliberate. Milo growled again but didn't bark. He stayed by my side, trembling slightly. The footsteps stopped outside the bedroom, and then the knob turned. I screamed, backing away, gripping the bat with both hands. Milo lunged at the door, barking and snarling. The knob stopped turning. I stood frozen, breathing hard, sweat pouring down my neck. Then came a whisper. So faint I almost didn't hear it. "I just want to talk." A man's voice, deep, calm, almost casual. I didn't answer. I stared at the door, willing it to stay closed, praying for it to hold. Then came a loud bang. Something slammed against it, hard. I screamed again, and Milo barked like mad, clawing at the floor. The second bang cracked the door frame. The third almost knocked the whole door loose. I backed into the bathroom, dragging Milo with me. We locked the second door behind us and huddled in the tub, waiting for something to break. I didn't care how stupid I looked. I just wanted to live. Then, silence. No more bangs. No more footsteps. Just silence. We waited like that for what felt like hours. Eventually, the power came back on. It was 3:43 a.m. I called 911 again. This time it went through. I told them someone had broken in, that I was hiding, that they needed to come now. The dispatcher told me to stay where I was. Police were on the way. When they arrived, I met them at the door, shaking and still holding the bat. The house was empty. Whoever it was had left. They found the broken window in the laundry room, muddy boot prints leading to the hallway, and scratches on the bedroom door where he tried to force his way in. But no fingerprints. No evidence of who it was or what he wanted. Nothing was stolen. The officers searched the area and found more footprints in the backyard. They led to the woods behind our property and disappeared. That was it. The police did their best, but without a face, a name, or a motive, there wasn't much they could do. Patrick took time off work so I wouldn't be alone. We installed security cameras, reinforced all the doors, and got a new security system with panic buttons in every room. But I never felt safe again. Every knock, every creak, every flicker of light sends me into panic. I don't sleep through the night anymore. I keep the bat beside me, sometimes a knife under my pillow, just in case. Because the scariest part, he didn't try to rob us. He didn't even seem angry. He just wanted to get inside. And he almost did. Story the end.
Story number 16.
I had just moved back to Michigan after nearly a decade away. The job market had finally tilted in my favor, and with my new position offering remote work and a decent salary, I thought it was time to put down some roots. I bought a modest house on the outskirts of a small town near Grand Rapids. It was old but sturdy, built sometime in the late 60s, with creaky hardwood floors and a charming front porch. It was a little too big for one person, but the price was right, and I figured the extra space would be good if I ever had guests, or if I decided to start a family one day. I moved in during early November. The leaves were finishing their final turn, blanketing the yard in deep reds and browns. It was a peaceful area, mostly retirees and families with kids. People waved at me from their porches when I drove by. It felt safe, like the kind of place where you didn't lock your doors during the day. The kind of town that made you feel insulated from the chaos you saw in big cities. The first few weeks were uneventful. I spent most of my time unpacking, working, and fixing up minor things in the house. The hallway light that flickered, the bathroom faucet that wouldn't stop dripping. At night, I'd watch TV or read in the living room with a blanket wrapped around me. It got cold fast that year. The first odd thing I noticed was on a Tuesday morning in late November. I stepped out onto the porch to grab a package and saw muddy footprints on the wooden steps. They weren't mine. I'd been inside since the previous evening. They led from the sidewalk up to the front door, but didn't leave again. I checked around the house, wondering if maybe a delivery person had come back after dark and stepped in mud, but the package had clearly been placed cleanly and dry. Still, I chalked it up to an overactive imagination. Maybe the footprints were older and I just hadn't noticed them before. I swept the porch, locked the door, and went on with my day. A few days later, I was in bed around midnight when I heard a sound downstairs. It wasn't loud, a creak maybe, but distinct. I muted the podcast I'd been listening to and held my breath. The house was old, I told myself. Old houses creaked, but then I heard it again. Footsteps. Soft, slow. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding. My bedroom door was open, and from the upstairs hallway, I could see the faint glow of the nightlight I'd plugged in near the top of the stairs. It flickered once. Then again, the footsteps stopped. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight. I eased out of bed and walked barefoot to the top of the stairs, listening. Nothing. Just silence. I held the phone like a weapon and crept halfway down the stairs. From the living room, I could see that the back door light was on. That light only came on with motion. I crept the rest of the way down and did a quick sweep of the first floor, turning on lights as I went. No one, no sign of forced entry. The doors were locked, the windows closed. I checked every room, even the basement. Nothing. Still, I didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, I found something new. A penny, perfectly centered on the front doormat, heads up. I hadn't dropped it. I barely used cash. I stared at it for a long time before picking it up and setting it aside. Later that day, I installed a security camera facing the front porch. Over the next few days, I checked the footage obsessively. At first, nothing happened. Just squirrels darting across the railing, the mailman, the occasional neighbor jogging past. Then, on a Saturday, around 3:30 a.m., I saw him. The footage showed a man, tall, heavy-set, wearing a hooded jacket, approach the porch from the left. He stepped into frame slowly, deliberately, as though he knew exactly where the camera was. He walked right up to the door and stood there. He didn't knock, didn't try the handle, just stood for nearly 10 minutes, and then he turned and walked away. I saved the clip and called the sheriff's office. They sent a deputy out later that afternoon. He watched the video, took some notes, and asked if I had any enemies or anyone who might want to scare me. No, I said. I don't even really know anyone around here yet. He gave me a non-committal shrug, told me to keep my doors locked, and call 911 if it happened again. I asked if they could patrol the area more frequently at night. He said they'd try, but it was a small department. That night, I pushed a chair under the front doorknob and slept with a kitchen knife on the nightstand. Days passed, then a week. Nothing happened. I started to relax, until the power went out. It was a Tuesday night. I was brushing my teeth when everything went dark. No wind, no storm, just sudden, silent darkness. My phone buzzed with a local outage alert. Estimated repair time, 3 hours. I grabbed a flashlight from the drawer and lit some candles. Then I locked all the doors, twice, and went to bed early. I woke around 2 a.m. to the sound of a door shutting, not slamming, clicking, deliberate. I sat up instantly, my breath caught in my throat. The power was still out. I reached for my flashlight. Footsteps, just outside my bedroom. Then the softest sound of floorboards creaking. I held my breath. Another step. I knew my house. I knew its sounds. These were footsteps. Human. I eased out of bed and tiptoed to the closet. It was deep enough to hide in. I slid the door open and slipped inside, pulling it shut as quietly as I could. I turned off the flashlight and held it tight to my chest. Then came the sound of my bedroom door slowly opening. A pause, then footsteps inside. I could hear them crossing the room, slow, unhurried. I pressed a hand to my mouth and prayed they wouldn't open the closet. But they did. The door creaked open just a few inches, then stopped, long silence. I thought I was going to pass out. I could hear my heart hammering in my ears. Then the door shut again. More footsteps, then nothing. I waited for what felt like hours before I dared open the closet door. The room was empty. The door to the hallway stood wide open. I crept through the house, checking each room. Whoever had been there was gone. The chair under the front doorknob had been moved. The back door was unlocked. When the sun came up, I called the sheriff's department again. They took it more seriously this time. A detective came out, took fingerprints, and reviewed the camera footage. The intruder had cut the power and then disabled the front camera, something you'd have to know how to do. That's when they started suspecting it wasn't random. They asked me for the names of people I'd known from before I left Michigan. Ex-boyfriends, old coworkers, anyone who might hold a grudge. I gave them what I could. They promised to keep me updated. I didn't wait. I booked a hotel that night and stayed there for 3 days. When I came back, it was just to grab essentials. But even at the hotel, I couldn't sleep. I kept checking the security app. I added more cameras, backyard, side yard, even one inside the living room. One night, while watching the feed from the hotel, I saw the man again. He walked through the backyard, calmly, hands in his pockets. He looked up at the camera and stared into it for over a minute. His face was partially covered, but his eyes were visible. He smiled. I called the police again. They checked the house, but he was gone by the time they arrived. No prints. No evidence he'd broken in this time. The detective called me 2 days later. They'd found something on one of the prints. A match. A man named Daniel Brewster, arrested for stalking, breaking and entering, harassment, multiple times. He'd been out on parole for less than a year. The detective asked if the name meant anything to me. At first, it didn't. Then I remembered. In 2009, I'd worked at a call center in Lansing. A guy there, quiet, awkward, started showing up at my cubicle with coffee every day. asking if I wanted to hang out. When I declined, he left notes in my car. I reported him to HR. He was fired a week later. I never saw him again. Until now, he'd remembered me. Somehow tracked me down. After more than 15 years. The police put a rush on getting a restraining order, but they couldn't find him. He'd vanished. That weekend, I moved into a different hotel under a different name. I told no one where I was. I quit my job, sold the house remotely through a real estate agency, and left Michigan for good. It's been almost a year. Sometimes I still wake up thinking I hear footsteps outside the door. Once last month, I found a penny. Heads up. On the mat outside my apartment. Story the end.
Story number 17.
It had been a long week, and by Friday night, I was looking forward to nothing more than a quiet evening at home. I lived alone in a modest 2-story house just outside of Knoxville, Tennessee, nestled in a peaceful suburban neighborhood where everyone kept to themselves but waved when they passed you by. I'd only lived there for a year, but I liked the quiet. The neighborhood felt safe, far removed from the chaotic noise of the city. I had just finished dinner, leftover chicken pasta, and poured myself a glass of red wine when my phone buzzed with a notification from the Neighborhood Watch app. It was a post about a suspicious man seen walking near the cul-de-sac on the next street over around 6 p.m. The poster described a tall male dressed in dark clothes, wearing a hood and gloves, moving from driveway to driveway as if looking for something. Someone mentioned he might have been casing houses. I read it and shrugged. Creepy, sure, but that cul-de-sac was 2 blocks away and my street was better lit. Still, I double-checked my doors and windows. Everything was locked. The motion lights were working. I even pulled the living room curtains shut tighter. Afterward, I curled up on the couch with my blanket, turned on an old crime documentary, and let the unease fade. Around 10:30, I heard a tap. It was subtle, almost like the wind, but not quite. It sounded like fingers tapping glass. I muted the TV and listened, heart thudding. Another tap came. 3 quick knocks, too light to be a fist. I looked toward the front window, but saw nothing. My porch light was on. I crept to the peephole in the front door and looked out. The porch was empty. I stood there for a moment, straining to hear anything. Maybe it was a branch brushing against the window, I thought. I turned back toward the living room, then froze. There was a shadow moving across the floor. It came from the side window, near the corner of the house, where the curtain wasn't pulled fully shut. I crouched low and inched toward it, carefully peeking through the gap in the curtain. At first, I didn't see anything. Then just past the edge of the glass, I spotted the very top of someone's head. They were crouched down beneath the window. My heart felt like it stopped. I couldn't move for several seconds. Then I backed away slowly and grabbed my phone off the coffee table. I dialed 911 and told them someone was outside my house. The dispatcher was calm, but my voice was shaking. She asked for my address and told me to stay on the line. Officers were en route. While I spoke, I crept upstairs and peeked through my bedroom window, which overlooked the side yard. The motion light in the backyard flicked on. I moved quickly to the back window. There he was. He was standing just beyond the deck, partially in the shadow, staring up at the house. His hood was up, and I couldn't make out his face. What disturbed me most was that he wasn't trying to break in. He was just standing there, like he was waiting. I told the dispatcher what I saw. She advised me to stay hidden and lock myself in a room until the police arrived. I backed away, shut the bedroom door, and locked it. I sat on the floor, heart hammering, listening for any noise from downstairs. Then I heard a loud bang. It came from the back of the house, like a shoulder ramming into the back door. I nearly dropped the phone. The dispatcher asked what happened, and I told her someone was trying to force their way in. She said the officers were 2 minutes away. The banging came again. Then another crash. Glass breaking. A window. He was inside. I could hear the footsteps. Slow, deliberate, across the hardwood floor. I knew every creak in this house, and I could track his movement as he stepped carefully through the kitchen. Then nothing. I held my breath and stayed absolutely still. After about 30 seconds of silence, the stairs creaked. He was coming up. My bedroom didn't have a lock that would hold against a full push. I looked around for anything I could use to defend myself. The heaviest thing I had was a lamp. I unplugged it, gripped the base tightly, and stood near the door. The footsteps paused just outside the bedroom. There was a sniffing sound, like someone taking in a deep breath, as if trying to detect if anyone was in the room. I didn't breathe. The knob turned. It twisted slowly, gently, like whoever was out there didn't want to alert me. When the lock stopped it from turning further, there was a pause. Then came the softest knock I've ever heard. 3 gentle taps right at head level. I thought I was going to be sick. I backed into the corner. I felt powerless, trapped. Then, to my shock, the footsteps retreated. They went back down the hall. Sirens began to blare outside. Within seconds, red and blue lights filled the windows. I ran to the window and threw it open, screaming that the intruder was inside. I heard a crash, then footsteps running, probably trying to escape through the broken window. The police were yelling outside, and then a burst of silence. I waited. Moments later, there was a knock at the front door. This one real, firm, and deliberate. Police! I ran downstairs, letting them in. They found the broken kitchen window, glass shattered inward, and scuff marks on the floor where the man had climbed through. They searched the house from top to bottom. The man was gone. They never found him that night. The worst part was what they discovered in my backyard. There were footprints, one set large from heavy boots, but next to them were smaller ones, barefoot. The officer showed me photos he'd taken from the perimeter of my house. There were smudges on nearly every window, nose and fingerprints pressed up against the glass. He hadn't been alone. They told me to stay with someone for the night, just in case. So I called my brother and drove there immediately. I barely slept. Over the next few days, I had a full security system installed. Cameras, new locks, reinforced doors. But I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I stopped opening the curtains. I started sleeping with a knife under my pillow. 3 weeks went by with no incident. I tried to go back to normal. But one morning, as I left for work, I noticed something in my mailbox. There was no stamp, no address, just a single sheet of paper, folded once. I opened it. Inside was a blurry photograph of me, taken through my living room window. I could tell it was from the night I'd been on the couch with my wine, watching TV. The curtains had been slightly open, just enough to see me. Scrawled at the bottom of the photo in childlike handwriting were the words, "You looked comfortable." I dropped the paper and ran back inside, slamming the door behind me. I called the police immediately, and they opened another investigation. But again, no leads, no suspects. That was a year ago. I moved 6 months later to a condo in a more populated area. Top floor, secure building, multiple cameras. I still haven't felt safe since that night. I don't think I ever will. Sometimes when I'm watching TV, I'll glance at the window and wonder if there's someone on the other side of the glass watching me again, just waiting for another moment to knock. Story the end.
Story number 18.
It was January, the dead of winter, when my cousin Alina called and asked if I'd be willing to house sit for her while she and her husband were away on vacation. Their home was nestled in a quiet, wooded suburb about 30 minutes outside the city. I had just gotten back from school for break and didn't have any major plans, so I said yes. She offered to pay me, and honestly, I could use the money. Alina's house was big, 4 bedrooms, 2 stories, and kind of isolated, surrounded by trees on a dead-end road with only one other house across the street. She told me they had a security system, motion sensor lights outside, and deadbolts on every door. Still, I remember getting a strange feeling when I first pulled into the driveway. The woods were so dense, and the area was eerily silent, even in the middle of the day. She laughed when I mentioned it. "You'll be fine. It just takes a day or 2 to adjust," she said, tossing me the keys. Nothing ever happens out here. The first night was uneventful. I made pasta, watched a movie, and crashed early. But I couldn't sleep well. It was too quiet. Every time the furnace kicked on or the wood in the walls shifted with the cold, I'd jolt awake. Still, I figured I was just being paranoid. The second night is when things started getting weird. Around 2:30 a.m., I woke up to a faint thumping sound. Not loud, not sharp, just steady. I sat up in bed and listened, trying to pinpoint it. It sounded like it was coming from downstairs. My heart began to pound a little faster. I grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight, and tiptoed out into the hallway, but I could still see just enough. I made my way down the stairs and stood still at the bottom, listening. Nothing. The thumping had stopped. I waited there for a few minutes, half expecting something to move, but it didn't. I finally walked to the living room and peeked out through the blinds into the backyard. Motion sensor lights were off. Everything looked still. I went back upstairs, feeling foolish, and tried to sleep again. Just nerves, I told myself. The next day, I decided to go through the house and double-check all the locks. Everything seemed secure. Doors were bolted, windows locked. I even tested the security system. Worked fine. That helped ease my mind a little. That night, I brought my laptop into the kitchen and worked at the table while eating leftovers. It was almost midnight when I realized I hadn't turned off the lights in the garage. The switch was just off the kitchen, so I walked over and flipped it. That's when I noticed something that didn't sit right. The door to the garage, the one that led into the house, was unlocked. I froze. I hadn't been in the garage all day. I clearly remembered checking that door earlier. I locked everything. I turned the deadbolt slowly, trying to keep calm. Maybe I'd missed it. Maybe I thought I'd locked it, but I hadn't. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been in there. I opened the door just a crack and looked into the garage. It was dark, but I could see the faint outline of Alina's SUV. No movement. Nothing seemed out of place. I shut the door and locked it tight. That night, I slept with the door to the bedroom locked and a heavy chair propped against it. I woke up again around 3 a.m. to a different sound. This time it was the unmistakable creaking of floorboards, right outside my bedroom door. My heart dropped. I didn't move. I just stared at the handle, waiting. The creaking happened again, 2 slow steps. I grabbed my phone and opened the security app. The app showed no triggered motion from the cameras outside, no signs of entry, but whoever was outside my door was definitely inside the house. I didn't want to make a sound, but I knew I had to act. I opened the closet slowly and slid inside, clutching the phone in one hand. I texted Alina, "I think someone is in the house. Please call police." She didn't reply, probably asleep. I wanted to call 911, but I was terrified that even speaking a word would give me away. And then I heard the handle jiggle. Not fast, just a test, a slow, careful twist. I stayed completely still. I had locked the door and wedged the chair against it. That bought me some time. After about a minute, I heard retreating steps. I stayed in the closet for at least half an hour before I dared move. I didn't hear anything else, but I was too afraid to check the hallway. Eventually, I called the police, quietly, whispering. They arrived in about 10 minutes. They searched the house thoroughly. No signs of forced entry. No one inside. The officer was kind, but clearly skeptical. He said maybe it had been the house settling or an animal on the roof. But animals don't twist doorknobs. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, I noticed something else. The backsliding door that led to the patio had a smudge on the glass, like someone had pressed their fingers against it. No full fingerprints, just oily marks in the shape of a hand. I didn't have gloves or anything oily on my hands. I hadn't even opened that door since I arrived. I texted Alina again and told her what was going on. This time, she took it seriously. She told me to stay somewhere else if I wanted, but they'd be back in 2 days. I didn't want to leave and look paranoid, so I said I'd stay one more night and then leave the next morning. That was the worst decision I ever made. I was on edge the entire day, jumping at every sound. I kept every light on. Around midnight, I locked every door and window again. I placed pots and pans in front of the back door, hoping to make noise if someone tried to enter. I kept the kitchen knife within reach. Then, just after 1 a.m., the power went out. Not just flickered, gone. Every light, the heater, the Wi-Fi, silence. My heart started racing again. I grabbed my flashlight and phone. The security app wouldn't load. No signal. I peeked out the window. The house across the street still had lights on. Only my house was dark. I knew what that meant. Someone had cut the power. I called 911 immediately, but the call wouldn't go through. No signal. I ran upstairs, locked myself in the master bedroom, and again barricaded the door. Then, from outside the window, I saw movement. Someone was walking through the backyard. No flashlight, no phone light, just a silhouette against the snow. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Then, another shadow emerged from the trees. 2 people. They walked right up to the patio door and stood there. Just stood, waiting. They didn't knock. They didn't try to get in. It was like they were letting me know they were there. Then I heard something from downstairs, a window shattering. They were inside. I pushed the dresser against the door. I dialed 911 again. This time it rang. I whispered everything, trying not to panic. I could hear them moving below me. Quiet steps, the floor creaking, drawers opening, cabinets closing. They were searching again, looking for me. The dispatcher told me officers were on the way to stay quiet and hidden. Then the hallway creaked. They were upstairs. I pressed my back against the wall and stared at the doorknob. Seconds passed. The handle started to move. Then the pressure. The full weight of someone trying to force it open. The door held. The chair and dresser held. I backed toward the closet. A loud thud. Something hit the door hard. Another. I whispered to the dispatcher that they were trying to break the door. And then, just as suddenly, the banging stopped. I waited, listening. Nothing. Then I heard the faintest sound of a police siren in the distance. A few minutes later, the dispatcher told me officers had arrived. I waited until they came upstairs and knocked, identifying themselves. When they finally opened the door, I nearly collapsed. They searched again, this time with more officers, K-9 units. They found fresh boot prints in the backyard and mud tracked in from the broken basement window, but the intruders were gone like they had been there before. The most terrifying part came later, when the police showed me photos from the basement. Hidden behind the furnace was a duffel bag. Inside, a hunting knife, rope, duct tape, gloves, and a burner phone. Whoever it was, they hadn't come to rob the place. They came for me, and they were patient. That night was supposed to be my last. They think they'd been watching the house for a while, maybe even before I arrived. Alina never had any issues before. No break-ins, no threats. The neighborhood was safe. But safe doesn't matter when someone chooses your house. I haven't house sat since. I barely sleep through the night without checking every door and window, twice. Even now, years later, I think about how quiet it was, how deliberate, how close they got, and how if that door hadn't held, I probably wouldn't be here to tell you any of this. Story the end.
Story number 19.
The last time I felt truly safe in my own home was months ago, before everything happened. Now, the place that was supposed to be my sanctuary feels like a trap, a nightmare I can't wake up from. I'm still trying to process it all, still trying to tell myself that it was real, that it wasn't just some dark dream that slowly unfolded over hours that seemed like days. But it was real. Every moment of it. It started like any other night. I live alone in a small townhouse on the outskirts of Columbus, Ohio. The neighborhood is quiet, mostly families and retired folks. I've lived there for 3 years, never had any trouble, never even a hint of something strange. I have a dog, Max, a golden retriever who's as lazy as he is protective, and that night he was curled up on the couch while I cooked dinner. I was making spaghetti around 7:30 p.m., the house filled with the smell of tomato sauce and garlic. The windows were open to let in the cool fall air. Max was lying by the kitchen table, half asleep, but still alert to any noise. I was scrolling through my phone, catching up on messages from work when I heard it. The faint sound of footsteps outside, on the porch. At first, I thought maybe it was one of my neighbors, someone just walking by, but it wasn't normal footsteps. They were slow, deliberate, almost cautious. I paused and looked out the kitchen window, the one that faces the front yard. Nothing but shadows. The street was empty. I shrugged it off, figuring it was just my imagination. I went back to cooking. Then the power went out. The lights flickered and died, and the kitchen plunged into darkness. Max stood up immediately, ears perked, growling low in his throat. I grabbed my phone, which still had some battery, and switched on the flashlight. The whole house felt colder without the lights, and the silence was heavier, almost suffocating. I checked the circuit breaker. Nothing was tripped. It was the whole neighborhood, no power. I sat down on the couch, trying to keep calm. Max sat beside me, his body tense. I told myself the power would come back soon. These things happen. Then the knocking started. It was soft at first, just a gentle tap on the front door. Then it grew louder, more urgent. I tried to ignore it, thinking it was someone who might need help, maybe a neighbor or a delivery person confused about the outage. "Who's there?" I called out, voice shaking a little. No answer. Just the knocking. I grabbed my phone and tried calling 911, but there was no signal. The outage had apparently killed cell towers in the area. I texted my friend, but the messages never sent. My heart was pounding. I backed away from the door and peeked through the peephole. There was a man standing on my porch. He was wearing dark clothes, a hoodie pulled low over his face. I couldn't see his eyes. He didn't move, just stood there, staring at the door. The knocking stopped. Then a voice, low and calm, but chilling. "I know you're home. Open the door, please. I just need to come in." I didn't respond. I locked every door and window I could reach, pulling the blinds shut. Max was growling harder now, pacing in front of the door. Then, without warning, the man started banging on the door, full force. The wood cracked beneath the blows. I could hear it splintering. I grabbed the baseball bat Nate had left behind when we broke up months ago. I never really liked having it around, but tonight it was the only thing standing between me and whatever was outside. The banging stopped suddenly. I listened. Silence. Then the back door rattled. I live in a townhouse with a small fenced backyard. The back door has a deadbolt, but whoever was outside was trying it with such force it felt like it could give way. I ran to the back door and tried to slide the bolt, but it was stuck. Someone had jammed a screwdriver or something in the latch. Panic surged through me. I grabbed my phone again and ran to the living room window, planning to break it and escape out the front door if necessary. I raised my fist to the glass, but before I could strike, Max let out a low growl and froze. Then I heard the footsteps behind me, heavy, slow, deliberate. I spun around and saw the man standing in the hallway, just a few feet from me. His eyes were cold and empty. His mouth twisted into a slow smile. "I told you to open the door," he said. I swung the bat at him with all my strength, connecting with his arm. He barely flinched. He grabbed the bat and twisted it from my hands like it was nothing. He moved closer. I backed up until my back hit the wall. Max leapt between us, teeth bared, growling fiercely. The man didn't even glance at the dog. Instead, he lunged at me. I screamed and tried to push him away, but he was too strong. Then, suddenly, the back door burst open. Another man stepped inside, tall and muscular, holding a crowbar. The two of them exchanged a look, and the second man shouted, "Grab her!" I kicked and scratched, trying to break free. Max bit one of the intruders on the leg, causing him to stumble. But there were two of them, and I was alone. They dragged me toward the back door. I don't remember everything that happened after that. My mind went blank. All I know is that I screamed for help, that Max kept biting and growling, and then the police arrived. Some neighbor had called 911 after hearing the commotion. The men ran, disappearing into the night. I was left trembling, bruised, but alive. The police found evidence that these men had been casing the neighborhood for weeks, targeting homes during power outages. They used signal jammers to block cell service, making it impossible to call for help. They never caught the men. I moved out a week later. I still have nightmares. I still hear footsteps outside my window. I still wonder what would have happened if Max hadn't been there. Home is supposed to be safe, but sometimes it isn't. Story the end.